vamos conversar com Radouan Mriziga, coreógrafo, que está neste momento no Teatro São Luís a apresentar o Second Six. Vamos conversar em inglês para facilitar a conversa. Eu queria evitar ter que fazer a tradução em simultâneo. Espero que está ok in English. So, in English?
Yeah.
Thank you, Radouan, for being with us. Thank you for your beautiful performance also.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Very welcome. A few years ago, I read an interview with the musician Elvis Costello, and he was mad at a journalist who wrote about him, and he told writing about music, it's like dancing about architecture. So he meant to say it's something impossible, it's something ridiculous to do. Did you come to this planet to prove that he was wrong?
Yeah, exactly. Well, it will depend always of which perspective you take actually, what is dance and what is architecture. And then of course if you talk about concrete architecture and dance, of course maybe there is no an obvious relation between the two. But what I do, I'm not making a dance that that it represents architecture, but actually I'm constructing or building an ephemeral architecture that it's not about what the architects will do, but also that brings me from a concrete architecture and questioning the space and dividing the space from the body to buildings or constructions, and then to take it somewhere else. And as we were saying now, when you think about development of architecture or societies in general, it's not anymore about how big and how strong and how heavy the building is, but it's more how it's light, how it's integrated and recycled and in relation to the nature around it. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, yes, maybe he's wrong.
Because let us together.
With all my respect to him.
Zoom for Elvis Costello. He's a great singer. He doesn't know anything about dance. Let us zoom out a bit and have a look at your work, which is, for a young artist as you are, a very surprisingly coherent opus of what you've done up till now. So people in Lisbon maybe have seen that 2 years ago at the festival we presented 55, which was your first work after school, right? So now there is 7. Between 55 and 7 there was 3,600. Can you maybe tell a little bit more about why this fascination with numbers, how these numbers translate to the development of a language, mm-hmm. I think, mm-hmm. and how these performances relate to each other?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's actually as you say, it's a language, and then because I went to numbers because since I always had a problem with the linguistic and the language, and then the memory of the text and all what have to do with language and writings. So I always put, even when I was a child in school and everything, I was always putting more effort in things that I understand, and then can develop in it by understanding it, but not by learning by heart or remembering names and things. So I was just good in numbers and physics and sports and things. So and then when I start to make my work, the first question I had is how I'm gonna relate to the linguistic, and it came from very simple need is to put the title first, and then I live in Brussels, and I'm from Marrakesh, but also Brussels. It have two languages, and then me actually speaking English in Brussels. So it was like okay to put a title for a piece for me, and because I'm also a little bit maniac about details, so for me to put a title in English and then try to translate it every time or to leave it like that, it's very problematic for me, the whole thing of like just putting a title with the language and then be happy about it. So came back my love to numbers, because it's just an abstract, which is not abstract, but I mean it's a language that can be what it is without interfering. Yeah.
But I mean, it's not only to facilitate your the finding of a title that you refer to numbers. I mean, these numbers are also
yeah, no, of
central in
course.
your work.
Yeah, and
So
then
if you go back to 55, which is based on the number 5, Maybe
yeah,
you
and
use that as
actually,
an
yeah, actually, it's then, and then it gets very, very complex, because then I start to call my pieces with numbers, but also the whole piece becomes constructed around the number, and then each number actually become a kind of system to compose the piece. Because what I always say in my work is that I use a lot of tools, and then the work it's about something else. But the tools inside it, it's varied from mathematics to dance to text to everything. And then when, for example, I started to work on 55, which I was in 5 because I started from 1 actually, but I was still in school. And then when I finished school, I was in number 5. So I composed everything around 5. And that's it. Then everything started to be conceptually. I mean, conceptually in the composition around 5. But the work itself of 55, it was actually inspired or turning around the functional architecture. But then that's also always like in 7 as well. The whole piece is composed around 7. It means like the number of the dancers, the music, the rhythm of the piece is always around or on 7 or on 5 or on 6, or also the costume, the objects in stage, like everything becomes around this number. Yeah. But then the work in itself, it treats another subject, which is it's always related to architecture, but also because architecture and geometry, because also the numbers are I mean, if you take geometry and rhythm, and then they actually mean the same thing in numbers. So if you talk about 5, and you make...
When you speak about rhythm, that's of course when you study in a dance school.
Yeah.
That's the first thing you're being confronted with.
Yes.
Is counting.
Yeah, but also visual. I mean, also because that's something. I mean, of course, in dance, the rhythm is something very important, and you study it a lot. But also me, I had always, maybe that's why I do a lot of geometry, or I'm fascinated with about this object, because also it's rhythmical. It's just the I mean, it's rhythm in form, and that's also what I grew up with most of time around. It's I think in Lisbon you can see it as well, but it's like this. It's rhythmical visual objects, which is geometry.
Mm-hmm.
Pythagoras says that rhythm it's numbers in time, and geometry is numbers in space. Yeah.
Yeah, makes sense.
And that's what I do.
But and is there also I mean, it's a dangerous word, and I don't want to make it too heavy, because I understand that there is a lightness also in your work and a sense of humor in the way you treat it. But there is also a certain cosmology in these numbers,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and the way they relate to each other. And I had the idea that that's also present. So I mean, if 5, it's meaning if I'm not mistaken, 5 is man, no?
Yeah, it's the human body. Yeah.
And 6 is the devil, and 7 is God.
Yes, the 7 is it's heaven.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
abstract.
Yeah, but I mean, that's also the thing. I mean, with numbers, that's also what it. Because I also, when I start to do my work, my questions were how to relate to the universe, even though it sounds very strong, big, but how to relate to the universe, but in universal way. So it's not by my I have a I mean, I can use other tools from my culture or from other places, but I wanted to be to relate my work to universal questions, but through something also universal. And then numbers, in it was always something universal. Or I am one of these people who thinks that the language of the universe is numbers, but I don't know if I mean I just like to believe it myself, but I don't impose it to other people that it's truth. Yeah.
And if we from there, if we zoom in a bit on 7, because I know that some people haven't seen it yet, so maybe we have to make sure that we don't tell
Say
any
everything.
spoilers. But zooming in, I mean, this sort of the maybe first you can before we go into that, first you can say a bit about the way what you explain also in your program text, the reference to the 7 world wonders and so on, and how that is present in the performance.
Yeah. So in the trilogy with 55 and 3600. With 55, it's really the exercise of going really to the base of what for me is a dance piece related to architecture or space in general, and that was like really like we can call it the map of the trilogy. So it was all about just my body in space, measuring the space and creating a visual object that comes from these measurements. Mm-hmm. And then 3600, I went.
Sorry to interrupt you. It's also man as measure for all things.
Yeah.
Very much.
Yeah. It's exactly. It's really like starting from the body, from my body, and then it expanding towards other levels. And then 3600, it was more a visual piece. So I was like really, I made it thinking of other spaces that are not theaters. And then actually it started also because with 55 and 3600, also my relation to what is a theater, what is another space, start also to come because I question the space in general. So I question also where I make performance and why I make it there, or what does it mean a performance in different spaces. So 3600 was mainly made for museums or more of site-specific work. But then it was invited in theaters as well. It was like, and then in that piece I was actually constructing. I had just the bricks, like 360 bricks. And they was just constructing like I just had six buildings that are referential to different buildings in history, and then we built them, and they transform from one to another one. And then in 7 I had and that's somehow it was quite also for me myself in my research. It was like how I went really far in this idea of constructing, because I wanted to construct, and I have this fascination about the craftsmanship of constructing. And then I went really towards this really constructing real object, 3D buildings. And then when I finished this construction, I also it refers to what we were saying now. I also felt the need to another kind of architecture that it's not construction. It's another level. It's an imaginary level. It's ephemeral. It's not there to stay. It's there to stay maybe in the imagination of people. And then came 7, and then it took me to this actually idea of constructing a huge thing, but that thing never stayed, which is the 7 wonders, and then all these societies
Seven wonders
of the world. And then because they all were destroyed because of nature or war, but at the same time they were
except for one.
yeah, except for the pyramid. And that was for me very appealing to imagine also these buildings, because they were so important for their societies to build, and to be proud of this huge construction, this very developed engineering. But then anyway, nothing of that stayed. What stayed is actually only the knowledge that was accumulated in making these buildings. And then for me, that was the most important element in this part of the history. So I took it, and I wanted to rebuild these 7 wonders differently with the dance performance. Mm-hmm. And that's what is 7.
And if this do you place them concretely? I mean, when you start making these performances, do you really start from each of the 7?
Yes, actually, it started as a each person have a wonder. It's solos. We are 7 people, and each person have a wonder. And also, actually, we used it also for the dramaturgy of the piece, like in the spacing, because they are all in the Mediterranean, around the Mediterranean. So we all, even in the spacing, we space in relation to each other, and also in the time of the piece, the solos that are in relation to each other, but also actually in history, because some of them are related to each other, like some, for example, the Temple of Zeus and the Temple of Artemis are related in history, but also Colossus was destroyed by Artemis as well. So there is a whole also dramaturgy is created by the history of these wonders, and that's I use actually in the composition of the piece. But I always, in my work, I always do not put actually in front how the piece is constructed. I always leave it as a hidden part. So I like to talk about it, but not really to write it in the programs.
Okay, yeah. But it's okay to speak about it.
Yeah. I mean, now I'm speaking about. There is a lot of hidden things that will not come. Yeah.
Because you spoke about it. The what I find fascinating in the performance, and it is, in that sense, a parallel for me to what also fascinates me in 55, is the way when it uses these concrete, starts from concrete examples and tries into constructing, let's say, virtually or ephemerically something which refers to the sublime, because it was the seven wonders. So that and if I mean that's of course my reading of it. But for me, when I see the performance, I have the
Most
idea.
of the time, I have a good reading of my pieces. So.
I have the idea that you go even higher. So I mean, if there is this sort of the pyramid, you go stand on top of the pyramid and to reach even higher. So there's this reference of the sublime, which is related to cosmological and religious questions, of course. But there is also very much, like in 55, man as measurement for all things. There's something very humanist and down-to-earth human about it, which I believe is also very present in 7. You want to talk a bit about that?
Yeah, I always say in my work, I always try to make the stage of the performance a place for where the intellect, the body, and the spiritual meet. So for me, a performance or my performances, it's always an attempt to actually exercise the intellect, but also the body, but also then to put a spiritual level in it, which is, it doesn't have to be always religious, but it is spiritual, and of course because of in 7 my solo, it's the pyramid actually. And then because I only build things in 7, I do not dance so much in 7. So I'm like only the building. So I constructed everything in the building also visually when it's possible, because in some places it's not gonna be possible. But I constructed also everything that goes down from the body, which is what Bruno does actually, or even from where we start as, which is the voice, and then the rhythm of the body, and then Bruno, and then it goes up to Maite, where she's talking about an imaginary space, and then it goes from Maite to.
Which space is it that she talks
It's
about?
the mausoleum.
Okay.
Yeah. And then from Maite goes Suhad, which is the hanging gardens, and then it goes to Zoltan, which is the Colossus, and then it starts to come down again.
The part upstairs.
Yeah. And then it starts to come down again with the trio, which is it's redoing the Colossus but from down because it was destroyed. And then to Ilada, which she does again a very body work exercise on stage, and then we go back again to the sound and the body, the rhythm. So it is actually constructed like this.
If we speak about a little bit about choreographic language. We've spoken about it a few times. I mean, you start from an idea of the utility of a movement. No, I mean, there is, and if you look at 55, it's extremely explicit. There is, I mean, each movement is necessary to build that virtual space that you make. You want to go a bit into that and see how that relates to 7?
Yeah. For me, when I started also making work, my main question was always how I can also relate dance to or what I can make with the knowledge of dance, or because I studied dance for a long time, and then at certain moment you are doing dance, and then you live in another society, and then you are like, okay, how yeah, maybe this is like very dangerous what I'm saying, but anyway, Like, and then you are like, okay, what I can do with this knowledge. I mean, dance, it is what it is, and it is important and necessary how it is. But also I had my own question of accumulate knowledge that should serve for maybe something else than the dance in itself. And then I started with the idea of, okay, I want to use my body to construct something else, because maybe because also I came from I mean my father was a builder actually. So maybe yeah. So I was like, okay, but I didn't know that at that time. I mean, I knew my father was a builder. I didn't know that maybe it's related. So until this year, I realized that. So and then I was like, okay, what I can do with this knowledge, and then the first, like very close, like answer to me was to construct another object with it, not the dance in itself. And then to construct another object, it was gonna be maybe something else. It doesn't have to be a visual object or a geometrical object or a construction. It could be I don't know, a table or a song, or like it could be something else. But then through going really deeply in this, in my body knowledge, I started to feel a necessity to define also the space around me, and then to measure the space around me, and then to make my space inside this space, and then to take it further and further. And then that's why I went to work on the functional architecture, the modern architecture. And then from there I started to actually find the language that is, or language and practice that serve this a body functioning for another object. And then I started also to be more attracted by the craftsmanship in general, but the craftsmanship also in dance and choreography as a craftsmanship in itself, and how it can relate to other craftsmanships. And then it went to constructing, and then it comes to 7, where it developed from measuring with the body and constructing to actually using the body to also construct something that it does not exist concretely. And then maybe I did a circle and I came back to dance again, because that's okay. In the end, then you're like, okay, I'm dancing again. But I think that's, for me, maybe it's, I mean, all these tools now exist together, and they make sense for me together now. So maybe circle, maybe it's gonna continue to something else. But for 7, this where this development took me.
Yeah, because that would be my next question. Where does it take you
Yeah.
from here? So after 7, there is already an 8.
Yeah, there was an 8, and then there is an 8.2. And there is, yeah, and then there is a 0 point also, yeah, and there is 9, say the bird. So there's actually a lot of things after that.
But is it in what sense? Is it a continuation on a research?
Yeah, and then
it's not a joke, no? That
No.
the numbers continue.
No, it's not a joke. It's serious. I go from 1 to 9, and I come back to 1, and then 0 point is a continuity. It's a research, but also is a kind of more an installation project that it's going on with different people in different places.